When I was participating in the AQ course as a student last year, I found that there were quite a few techniques from different modules that were very useful in applying to one big project that my students complete in microbiology. And we've been going over some of those in block 2 and then swing back to a number of them in block 4. And these techniques, there's a lot of overlap in them, and you're going to find as you go on that you'll see techniques popping up again, possibly giving you ideas to use them in different forms. But I found that making these small adjustments to this one project that almost every intro microbiology course at community colleges does a project very similar to this, has made a really big difference in my students' success, but also how they feel about the project. And so I just wanted to point out some of the techniques I applied to this one particular project that really increased the transparency of it. Just to point out how you can take small adjustments using these techniques and make a big difference. So it was also a good idea. It helped me a lot to sit down and reflect on what I achieved overall with this project, having used this project again for a semester since completing these modules. So I made this slideshow PowerPoint, and I'll go through it. It's a little bit longer than I usually record, but perhaps it can be useful to you. So this project is an unknown organism lab report. And what these students do is after they've learned the basic techniques, they will participate for 5 weeks. They get a bacterial species that they don't know what it is, but there are many different ones. So each person does not have the same one. And they need to do a series of tests and decide what tests they will do next based on the data that they received from previous tests. So it's really data driven, more like research. It's just not a plug and play kind of project where they don't have to think about the next step. They need to make decisions on what they will do next and then record their data, analyze it, and report it in a report that is styled after a scientific research article. That has been a real challenge for the students because it's a type of writing that they're not used to doing. Um, and it requires use of scientific terminology and objectivity. And if they're confused about their project, they have a hard time drawing conclusions and writing their report up correctly. So these are the techniques that I used. So first, the purpose of this was to help them improve their abstract. And their abstract is the paragraph which defines the purpose of the study and a basic summary of the outcome. There are no cliffhangers in scientific papers. You tell up front what your outcome was. So the shortcoming of this section of the report was that students would provide abstracts that were way too general and did not give any insight into the purpose of the study. They didn't understand why they were writing this introduction little paragraph. So I used the technique where I provided them student exemplars. A very good one. Actually, I ended up providing a couple of them because it can be very good, but it's very different. And then satisfactory work and also unsatisfactory work. And the impact of this was that the abstracts I received when they had these tools available really they really improved in their scope and in the detail that they provided about the studies, but also were able better to relate the work that they were doing in the lab to real world applications. Why microbiologists would really use a study like this, whether it's in human health or other applications. So that was very helping them understand why they were doing their particular study, also making a better product that they would turn in. The next part was really helping them use the format of a scientific research article. And what the problem was, the shortcoming was that students were skipping sections or blending them together and feeling like, and feeling is the point there. And in the scientific article, feelings don't count for much. But they felt like that they were covering all the bases. And so the technique I used was to provide templates where they could see the different criteria required. And that really helped clarify their format because each section of a scientific research article has different requirements, and so that they needed to be able to identify which type of difference in format was required for each different section. This really improved their organization of their data, and being able to organize their data made a big difference in helping them analyze their data and actually make decisions in their final steps of their experimental tests. And it resulted in an overall accuracy of identification of their organisms. Not just, but it did improve the format of their sections. So it had a greater impact than just the report. It really helped them organize their thoughts quite a bit. Another thing that they had difficulty with is, again, this objectivity and using scientific terminology, because they would write something where they said they felt like their organism was this, or I think it's this, um, and or just using visual descriptions rather than scientific terms. So that shortcoming use of lay terms in it, or describing their personal experience along the process. In learning, their personal experience is valuable. In scientific reporting, it's not desirable to include that. And so, to help them report in more objective terms and make sure that they're using the scientific terminology, I took an overall rubric for the assignment. I broke it into smaller rubrics for each section. This helps them better use scientific terminology because they could see for the section what was required, and it just made their reports better match the standards which would be required in journal publishing requirements. And the reports just were better than in previous semesters after just providing a broken down rubric rather than one overall rubric for the entire report. The last technique I wanted to point out that I added was helping the students pace their projects, because they would do all of the experimental work in lab and then procrastinate writing up the report. But they were missing out on doing some of that analysis that writing up data and looking at it helps with. They were also turning reports where they would shrug and they say, oh, I have no idea if this is what is required. And so I really needed to add something that improved transparency. I had the rubrics, I had these exemplars, and so what I did is I added staggered due dates, different sections as they were completing these lab stages. Then a stage of the report would come due, where they would bring a rough draft for peer review. That ended up being a very positive experience for them. The majority of the students brought in their rough drafts, and it was low stakes. They weren't being graded for their rough drafts on content. They brought them in, and even though not all students had a rough draft, all students had the opportunity to participate in the peer review. They used comment sheets for each other, and they were required to write their name on it and provide these comments, and these were turned in with the reports. But the comment sheets were based on the rubrics. So they all had the opportunity to practice applying rubrics to actual student work. And they didn't at first know how to put comments. And so I tweaked the report sheets to better give instructions on how to provide feedback. And so those students who brought their drafts in were rewarded by getting immediate feedback without penalty for mistakes. They were able to improve upon their reports before they turned in their final draft to me. And there was a big improvement in the scientific conclusions in the final draft because they had some feedback on, they had time to sit down and come up with their data and organize it, and then they received feedback on their data reporting from a peer, and that helped them think more critically about their data and space their time out so that they could come up with their conclusions. I had a higher rate of students identifying the correct organism because they took a look at their experimental results, and instead of just going based on their feelings, they followed the data, and students felt better about it. So these are just 4 techniques that I used. It was added these spaced out over these 2 semesters that I spent in the AQ course, and I'm going to continue using them. So it was good for me to hash this out, and if you've watched this entire video, I hope it's something that'll be helpful for you too.